Thank you for participating in the NIA and NHLBI Entrepreneur Workshop Series. This workshop covers the topic of licensing and partnering agreements. This breakout room, moderated by EthelRubin, discusses the topic of negotiation tips.
Hi, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me. If someone could put something in the chat letting me know that the audio is okay. I guess people are still joining. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So, oh, there's Gautam. Hello.
Hi, Ethel.
Hi, it's good to see you.
Lovely to see you.
It's great. It's great that so many people are joining us. And we got about 50 questions already in the queue. So the way we're going to do this room is I want to go through, I have categorized some of the questions into some of the key areas that people had a lot of questions about. So I'm going to go through those first, then I'll start answering some questions that come in from the audience. And that way, hopefully we'll be able to get through a lot of this. So first of all, like I said in my intro, I wish I had, some magical, this is the best tip that I've ever learned. Honestly, except for listening more than speaking, I think, different people have different experience, and you should just talk to as many people as possible about what's worked and what hasn't worked for them. And I'll also turn it back to the audience, like what has worked for you. One of the questions that I kept getting in various ways, shapes and forms is, what stage of development is the right time to start negotiating a licensing agreement? It's a question about timing. When do you want to start talking? I'm assuming pharma, right? To pharma, to large pharma, when you're talking about a licensing agreement and not doing a university, licensing a technology from a university. So, it used to be in my career that you wouldn't even have a discussion with pharma until you had clinical data, at least phase 1 safety data. And now the way these deals are working is that everything is going earlier and earlier. Pharma has to fill its pipeline with assets for development. They have, I'm not going to say eliminated their R&D because that's not true, but they have certainly downsized their internal R&D. And there's so much innovation that's happening at the small business, within small businesses, within small biotech, and within academia, that they are looking to you to fill in their pipeline. So I would say that today, you don't wait for phase 1 data. Today, we're talking to big pharma when you're in IND enabling studies, and sometimes even earlier. I've seen at least 5 deals in the past year that happened at discovery phase. So it's never too early, but you do have to know who you're talking about or who you're talking to. If the pharma that you're talking to has never done a deal in discovery phase, then chances of getting a licensing deal at that stage are very slim. If you're going to a pharma, which does, which is one of those that has done a lot of deals in the discovery phase or pre-IND, then obviously your chances are higher. You need to know as much as possible about the partner that you're sitting across. How important is your asset to them? If they've been, I'm just going to pick Alzheimer's disease because this is, it's sponsored by NIA. If they've been trying and failing with Alzheimer's, if they've got nothing but, spectacular failures in phase 2 and phase 3, how interested are they going to be in a even less de-risked asset for Alzheimer's? Or conversely, maybe they're putting it out there that we want to do something in Alzheimer's. We've got nothing but internal failures. We are looking for other things, and we'll take on the clinical development and de-risk it ourselves. So it could go both ways, and you won't know until you ask. So I would say that for licensing, talking about licensing assets to pharma, if you know that your pharma does deals at your stage, it doesn't hurt to reach out to them. Now, the question is how best to do so. Well, lucky for us in our industry, we have some fantastic conferences, which are all about licensing and business development and are staffed by all the biz dev people, the business development people in pharma. These are all the biotech industry, biotechnology industry organization conferences. Now, if you are already an SBIR or STTR awardee, what you might not know is that your institute, which is funding you, will actually sponsor you and pay your way, not lodging or meals or anything like that, but the actual registration at Bio. And if they do sponsor you at Bio, you will get one-on-one coaching, how to tell your narrative, what to expect, who to meet with when you're at bio to have these licensing discussions. So bio is a great one. There are all sorts of other venues and other conferences where we know we're going and expecting to have business development, licensing discussions. But bio for pharma is probably the number one. For devices and diagnostics, it's a little bit harder. It's not like I could say there's one conference, even though the AdvaMed does the MedTech conference in the fall every year, where you'll have business development people. That's really for commercial stage or near commercial stage devices and diagnostics. It's a little bit harder. I would say that going to a conference that is for your therapeutic area and starting to meet the people who are manning the booths. If you want to do a deal with Boston Scientific or you want to do a deal with Medtronic, and starting, even if the business development people from your therapy area or your business unit for your therapy area are not there, finding out who they are, reaching out to them. But there's nothing like a warm introduction. So if you're having a great discussion with somebody in the booth and talking about, we have a product for diabetes, who runs business development in your diabetes business unit, and asking them for that introduction. Hey, can you just send a quick email to your VP of business development that will be reaching out? That's a warm introduction. So that's about timing and how to. Another question, how do I know what reasonable licensing terms are? And how do I know, if this term sheet is market rates, or if they're trying to take advantage of me? And who should be the first person to put out the terms? I'm a big proponent of having the other side show their hand first. That's not always possible, but when it comes to licensing, that's usually what happens. I don't think anybody expects a small company that have never even done a deal yet to have a term sheet, anything more than, what do you expect, or what would be a nice deal for you, conversations like that. So a big proponent is to have large pharma put out their, put their terms first. How do I know if I'm getting a good deal? You don't. The market has to tell you. But there are certain things that you need to educate yourself about. And you need to learn by talking to people who have been there and done that, whether they're on your board of directors, whether they're investors in your company, whether they are advisors to your company, whether you're getting them from a mentoring network, whether you're getting it through whoever does your transactions or whoever you're going to get to do your transactions, whether it's an investment bank or whether it's a transactions attorney, to help guide you. There are certain things that you can do and that you should be keeping track of as an early stage company. And the first one is your responsibility, or the person who runs business development in your organization's responsibility, is to track deal making today and in the past 3 to 5 years, particularly in your therapy area and with your technology type. So if you're developing a small molecule therapeutic for Alzheimer's disease or a gene therapy for Alzheimer's disease, there'll be very different comparables. I don't think there are any comps for a gene therapy for Alzheimer's disease, so you're going to be the pioneer there. But for small molecule therapeutics and for biologics, we do have those. And you need to start looking for what those comparable deals are. How do you get access to them? Well, if you're lucky, they will be, just Google, and you should be able to find, some recent deals. At NIH, we have access to a couple of business intelligence tools. One of them is Global Data, which tracks deals. Another one is PitchBook, which tracks investments, but also has deals. So if you already are an SBIR or STTR awardee, reach out to your program officer, have them connect you with somebody in the small business office, or with my team who could look up some comps for you. But there's also Crunchbase that has a freebie, freely available. There are plenty of other tools like Cortellis or IQ Capital, many other business intelligence databases. Unfortunately, so many of the deals in our world are private and proprietary. You can't get all the terms. So when I say something like, one of my portfolio companies, Rodeo Therapeutics, just exited, to Amgen. And I know the deal is worth 600 million, but if I wanted to, or up to 600 million, because most of our deals in therapeutics are biobucks, which means you get a certain amount up front, but then the rest are milestone and royalty payments. You know, if I want to find out what they got up front, I might not be able to find that. But transactions attorneys who do this day in, day out might be able to tell you. Investment bankers might be able to tell you. And that will bring me to the next question of should I hire, some of you asked, should I hire experienced negotiators or investment banks to do these deals? And the answer is that sometimes it's a good idea. I'll get into that soon. But the importance of comps can't be understated when you already have some historical data of another company at my stage of development for a similar type of asset in a similar therapy area, you know, CNS, with a similar market opportunity, you know, $3 trillion market opportunity in Alzheimer's disease, licensed that they got $10 million upfront, and they were only in IND enabling stage, right? IND enabling studies. And then they got, you know, at the first patient, first enrollment, another $25 million, and phase 2 first enrollment, another $50 million. And then, you know, phase 3 first enrollment, another $100 million. And then, you know, X percent of royalties, depending on the amount of sales, you know, et cetera. If you have those comps in hand, it obviously arms you. Now, if you build around yourself an ecosystem of companies like yours, and I don't mean competitors because you're all working on a diagnostic for COVID, let's say, but companies like yours working on a diagnostic in the life science industry, working on a therapeutic, and create this environment or network of entrepreneurs and, you know, small, medium, large companies, all of you, you know, working in on your own therapy or on your own technology, and just sort of swap stories. You know, what was the deal worth? You know, can you tell me anything? Again, if they're sworn to confidentiality, they're not going to be able to tell you, but maybe they'll put hints down like, well, we got enough upfront to be able to fund the IND enabling work on our asset number 2. Or we got enough upfront that, or, you know, we got enough in our, you know, for this milestone that we'll be able to start clinical trials for the other one. We'll figure, well, IND enabling work is about $4 million. So it was some, you know, maybe $4 to $10 million, or maybe they'll drop hints. And so now I bring up the next question of bringing in experienced negotiators, transactions attorneys, brokers. So I'm going to say something that might say, you know, and I don't mean it in a negative way, because a lot of my friends and family are investment banks and brokers, you know, broker dealers, et cetera. But in our industry in life science, and probably in every other industry, the brokerage world is full of characters. And that's putting it mildly. People who promise you the world, but don't deliver. And you have to be very careful and in your due diligence. And again, even before you need it, create a network of people that you can call on if you ever need help. Now, sometimes for a small biotech or digital health or diagnostics or device company, a transactions attorney at a law firm has done enough of these that they can really act as your advisor and maybe even come into negotiations with them. And I know it's expensive. I know you're paying $300, $500, $800 an hour, you know, whatever it is for your law firm, but you'd only be paying more, if you hired somebody, you know, full time to do this role, assuming you had enough work for them. And number 2, if you can't do something on your own and you need the help, you're going to need to pay somebody, right? So the outcome of what you may get may so vastly outstrip what you're paying up front that you might have to start thinking about budgeting for somebody to help you in these things if you've never done them before. Now, if you are VC backed, you have the VCs who should be able to help you with this. If you are angel backed, sometimes you have angels who are who have done a lot of transactions and are very experienced and can maybe help you with this. If you have a board of directors, there could be somebody on your board. I mean, this is the importance of surrounding yourself with all the functional areas and with all the expertise you're going to need as you grow and develop and change from a research organization into a clinical development and hopefully one day commercial organization. You need to keep surrounding yourself with expertise. Now let's talk about broker-dealers. Some of the people that I know best and work with best are bona fide. They will not take on a project or a company that they don't feel that they can be successful with. They have a track record that can be validated on both sides, meaning that you can call the people that they say, you know, their references and will actually give them attribution for whatever it is that they're claiming credit for. But they're few and hard to find, you know, few and far between. They're hard to find. And when you have a relationship with them, it's golden, but it also costs. Most broker dealers will charge a monthly retainer as well as a percentage of the deal. If they are bona fide broker dealers, they will be SEC registered, which means that they have gone through all the training. They've got their Series 7 or Series 6 or, you know, other series that mean that they are qualified and that they agree to abide by SEC rules. And they will be good and they'll be worth their weight in gold because they'll bring you a $100 million deal or a $50 million deal or, you know, whatever it is. But again, there are a lot of carcasses along the way, and you have to be careful when you're getting into a relationship with a broker dealer to make sure that the agreement that you sign with them is reviewed by a lawyer. I don't want to see you getting into a deal where you may be the one who brings in the licensing or the partner, and yet they still will require, you know, their percentage when you were the one who went out there and found it. So a very well delineated agreement and something that you can get out of relatively quickly if you don't see that they're adding value. I'll take one more question that I have, you know, gotten, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So how to close a deal and what to do when the partner is delaying. So all the questions that I got related to what to do if the other side is blank. Again, you have to arm yourself with information, try to understand what's happening on the other side. You may need to have an experienced person alongside you to be able to tell you, well, when a pharma is doing that, or when a medical device company is doing that, or when the partner is doing that, it usually means X, Y, Z. Every situation is different. I think asking those open-ended questions like, you know, can you explain to me what is happening or what the delay is about? Is there anything I can do to, you know, hasten things or reopen things? Is there anything happening that I should be aware of? But those negotiation tactics of like saber rattling, I'm going to go somewhere else if I don't get this deal done in the next month. My experience is that stuff doesn't happen and it's a turnoff. In general, we're a very polite, very professional industry. And yes, things can get heated and things can get emotional sometimes, but that's never there's never a best tactic. Ask, you know, just keep asking, keep the lines of communication open. Just because you're talking to one pharma, as long as you don't have anything in writing saying you can't go approach anybody else, you could be having discussions with many pharmas and let the best man win, let the best company win. So I'm looking to see questions in that we got from our audience. How can startups gain more knowledge to accurately knowing the worth of their assets? So I think I answered that. Are there conferences for health software? Yes, there is. So in general for health IT, one of the big ones is it's called Health, HLTH. That's a big one. There's also another big one I'm trying to remember. Okay, a specific but generally useful audience renegotiating strategy. Okay, so someone said here, my company has developed and manufactures a medical device that's novel in the field. It has much potential in sales that have not yet been realized. I have tried to license to several large companies with some nibbles, but no takers. This week, I received an unsolicited email from a CEO of a small private capital, small cap private equity firm that does single company acquisitions. We have a phone call scheduled. What would be the best approach for this initial phone call? Do you have any opinion as to whether this contact is being done at the request of a larger company? Okay, so I don't know. That's a good question to them. Unsolicited offers are great in that they open up the door to figuring out what you're worth to somebody else. I don't know how to find out whether or not a company is an investor in the private equity fund. It's a question you could ask. How many medical device companies are LPs in your fund? And it's unusual for a large company to come in to acquire you through a private equity group. So I doubt that is the case, but you can always ask. I hope that answers your question. And okay, examples of BATNA. So somebody wants to know a little bit more about a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. There are some very specific examples that are used in these negotiation classes, and it's something that everyone can relate to in terms of buying a car. So if I want to buy a car and you're selling a car, and my walk away, and I'm buying a car and I know that I'm not willing to spend more than $8,000, and we start talking, and it's clear that you're not willing to sell for less than $10,000, that there's not going to be any negotiation here. My best alternative is now to go out to CarMax and find something for $8,000 or less. When it comes to a negotiation in the life sciences, you need to have a best alternative. If I cannot license this to Pfizer or to Lilly or to Novartis, which are my top 3 licensees, what's my best alternative? What am I going to do next? Am I going to get a CARB-X grant? Am I going to expect that BARDA may be interested in this? Is this something that NIH will fund? Is this something that I can go to a foundation with? Are we going to take a next round of VC financing instead of doing a licensing deal? What are my alternatives to this? So I hope that explains what BATNA is. It's an alternative. I also want to talk about, walk away. The reason that valuing your assets and keeping a watch on comps is so important is because you need to know when negotiations have gotten to the point that you're going to walk away. Some things are not going to be good for you. So for example, if your technology's largest market is in China and your licensee is going to take rights for China, well, what value of this asset is outside of China, right? You're not going to necessarily be able to find another licensee for ROW, rest of world or United States or whatever. Maybe at that point you say, we want you to buy us outright. We want you to acquire us outright, knowing that they're taking your largest market and and you want to be able to get a better deal and have them, buy outright. Any other questions? Just post them in there. Otherwise, I will continue. I got a number of questions related to negotiating rights to data from a hospital or to data from an academic research institution where you're doing an SBIR with them, maybe an STTR. I'm not sure what all that is related to, but more and more data rights, are part of these transactions, and it shouldn't surprise anyone, especially if you're reliant on machine learning where the data is key, right? Anything like that should not be surprising. You have to expect that they're going to give you limited data rights, anonymized data, restricted use data. So those are all terms that you should become very familiar with, and you have to make a decision of whether or not that's worth it to you or not. But these are becoming more common. I don't think they should raise any eyebrows. I think you just should be expecting, you should always go out there with what you ideally want, but expect that you're going to have limited rights. There was a question regarding in an agreement, what happens when you don't meet milestones, especially things related to COVID, COVID-related delays where your lab may have been shut down, or you may have had contaminants or whatever. So I wanted to just give a little bit of a shout out to renegotiating agreements, especially when it comes to licensing agreements from university, almost the very first thing that happens is renegotiating agreements. Don't think that just because you have an agreement, it's signed in stone and blood and there's nothing that you can ever, change. So renegotiating agreements is very common. It doesn't surprise anybody in industry. We very often have to go back and change some of the terms or some of the timelines. It could yield some pushback. It could yield some repercussions that could be punitive. Hopefully, nothing major. But renegotiating agreements is very common. So I want you to, always keep that door open. What are some common licensing terms and revenue sharing percentages? So, that's different depending on the technology and whether we're talking about an IP licensing agreement, term sheets from a university versus term sheets from an investor versus term sheets from a large industry partner. And I'm going to focus on the last one. There are actual example term sheets and terms for university licensing. There are a couple of universities that have established like no haggle pricing or no haggle licensing. One of them is Columbia University. At the helm of their tech transfer office is a guy named Oren Herskowitz. And he's really, I think it's right on their website. You could sort of see the terms that Columbia has, like a $1,000 down, 1 year option to license. Here are the royalty terms for a therapeutic versus a diagnostic versus a device versus software or digital health. So he puts it right out there. And I think it's very useful to look at that. So I want to focus on the last one when it comes to industry. There's almost always an upfront payment, which is usually in the millions of dollars for a therapeutic asset. There is, after that, there are milestone payments that are usually linked to de-risking an asset through the regulatory pathway. So if you're pre-IND, there might be a payment when you have an IND filing or an IND approval from FDA. There will be a payment in phase 1, a payment in phase 2, a payment in phase 3 as you enter clinical development. Then there is usually a payment associated with an NDA or BLA approval. Then there are payments that are royalties, and they're usually in the low single-digit percentages until you get to the $1 billion in sales, where it could get a little bit higher. So, I don't want to say if it's 3%, 4%, 7%, it's all, what you negotiate. And a company can definitely trade off, like we would take a higher upfront for a lower in phase 1, or we would take a higher in phase 2 for a lower in phase 3. Obviously, it's not in industries and in the licensing partners' interest to do that, because again, they're focused on de-risking this asset and bringing it as close as possible to clinical, to market approval and to commercial status. So, you have to figure out with your, transactions attorney, what kind of horse trading you can do to negotiate those things. But that usually does mean that, for like I said, a lot of licensing deals now happen in IND stage or in phase 1, phase 1 of development. So we might be talking 10 years before you ever see royalty payments, or 5 years, before you start to see the first of the milestone payments, the regulatory milestone payments. So it's important, to realize that when we're talking like a $600 million deal, we're talking $600 million all told. That could take 10 to 15 years to get to the point that it reaches its highest value. Any other questions from the audience here? You can unmute yourself and we could do some interactive.
I have a question about how this is different for software.
Yes. So when it comes to software, your licensing is really I'm assuming you're talking about a licensing use agreement. Like when I ran a software company, my licensing agreements gave the licensee rights to use our software, to benefit from our software, to do drug discovery from our software. I may ask for some rights in return. Pharma will rarely grant access to anything that could lead to something proprietary, but it could be things related to usage, marketing, testimonials, usage stats, not just like the number of users or, but things like what are the most typical uses of the software, or how has it led to things. We would sometimes ask them for rights to do case studies that could be used in the HBR, like in HBA, or case studies that we could use, that we could write white papers about. So you can, an early stage company certainly can ask for things that might not be so outrageous for a pharma company or for a hospital or for a research team to do, especially as you're trying to build your user base and you're trying to build sales. But those licensing agreements, software licensing agreements, is a very unique aspect of agreements. There are lawyers who specialize specifically in software licensing agreements. There are many lawyers. I have friends who do this, software licensing agreements, and there are all sorts of things that you need to do when you do software licensing agreements, including putting the master code into a vault, so that, and you also will need to protect yourself with, E&O insurance, errors and omission insurance, all sorts of things that you need to do, service level agreements, sub licensing. There are specific lawyers who deal with this, but it's almost always related to usage rights and to things you want in return. M. Chen, you have your hand up.
Yes, I have a question. So I want to understand for therapeutic, particularly probably in the IND phase or just getting close to phase 1, if you have a licensing deal with a pharma, does this kind of joint development, what determines whether you should actually work in the joint development versus a outright licensing? Which one actually works better for you, and what determines that? Is it your internal capabilities, or what drives the difference?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I would turn it back to you. What is your ideal outcome? What do you want to do? Sometimes it's better for you to accept money, do the work yourself, keep the learning and the tribal knowledge in your tribe, in your company, learn from your mistakes and what works and what doesn't. And sometimes it depends on the company. Sometimes a company is like, no, thank you. We want to do the clinical development or whatever ourselves, or the development ourselves.
I see.
But I would always turn it back to you, saying, what do you want? And in some cases, a pharma doesn't want to do the development. They want to pay you to do it for them.
I see. Does that your infrastructure, the capabilities that you have in-house, or infrastructure that you have when you enter the deal negotiation, does that matter, or they will give you the time and funding for you to put together more infrastructure and capabilities? Because usually startups don't have everything in hand, right? You're going by stage.
Right. So it's rare for me to see a pharma fund something where there isn't the capability in-house already. Like that, if you don't have the capability, you have to go hire people, they're not going to take that risk. But if it's just a matter of, yes, we have the people, of course, we're going to need to beef up. We're going to need to change from a group of 1 to a group of 3, or we're going to have to hire 3 consultants to help us. That will come out in due diligence, and that might be fine with them. But if you've got, let's say, a medicinal chemist who's the top in the world in whatever it is, something that's never been soluble before, right? Then I think, obviously your in-house expertise would be very valuable to them.
I see. Thank you so much.
No problem. Simon, I saw you have your hand up. You have a question? Simon Jia? No?
Yes, I have a question indeed. I have perception, usually the VC or the partner, they not value the non-dilutive funding from NIH grant. And that's why I saw the dollar actually using the NIH grant even in a maximum manner, every penny go to research. But yet, when you negotiate with the VC, in terms of the company valuation, they say, how much private money you have been raising? Why?
Yes, it's all because it's non-dilutive funding. NIH does not take a position on your cap table. So it's not valued in the sense of going into your valuation, your pre-money valuation. You can't use it as you can't use the amount of money as your pre-money valuation. You can use the value of the asset and the stage that it's at in terms of comparables, like other companies that had 3 assets in IND enabling studies on which they have spent $3 million in NIH funding, were valued pre-money at $10 million when they did their deals with VC A, B, and C, D. Therefore, I'm at least, as good as that, plus a little bit for inflation, or the fact that you have a hot asset, or whatever it is. But you're right. It doesn't go into the calculation of current pre-money valuation in terms of the money that has gone in. You have to use comparables for that.
I see. Thank you.
And like when we were talking about broker dealers and how to work with them, the guys who have done, or the girls who have done deal after deal after deal after deal, they could, they don't need to work hard to do DCFs and all these other things to do, valuations. They know intrinsically what they can get for you and what your deal is worth. They're still going to go and do the financial modeling because they want to justify it, to whoever it is, to the potential capital markets or to the potential, industry market. But, they know what these things are worth. And by the way, certain therapy areas and certain technology types are either hot or cold. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, nobody cared about oncolytic viruses. And then all of a sudden, Janssen did a deal with them for oncolytic viruses, and someone else did a deal in oncolytic viruses. And all of a sudden, oncolytic viruses are hot again. And now oncolytic viruses are not hot. And then they become hot again. And, so things like go in cycles. And sometimes it happens for unforeseen, reasons, like what happened to Elizabeth Holmes, I think, really turned back the entire investor appetite in clinical diagnostics. I was afraid it would do it for a whole generation, and it hasn't. Diagnostics have gone back, come back again. But I would say the 2-3 years after that whole thing, Theranos exploded, nobody was going to touch a clinical diagnostic with a 10-foot pole. It's just the nature of, stuff that happens. Okay. Okay, let's see. Here's somebody. I'm an orthotrauma surgeon. My company is pretty far along, a new implant to expedite fracture healing. We have a 510K. We're also working on a novel wireless technology. Somebody wants to connect to me. You should link into me and remind me that you want to talk with me, and I'll try to fit you in to give you a half an hour, separately. If you are an SBIR awardee, work through your program officer. I just don't have the time to do one-on-ones, with the whole world. So that's why we're doing this. Okay, more questions from the audience before I go back to the questions that I got. Speak now or forever hold your peace. And don't be shy. I answer questions very bluntly. Okay, where do you find comps? You have to keep track of things that are reported in the media. If you are not already on these, I call them trade rags, you should sign up for them now. So number one, Fierce Biotech is now starting Fierce Digital Health, and they also have a Fierce MedTech. So start following, you'll get a daily email or a weekly email of like all the deals that are happening. And again, sometimes they don't report the granularity of the deals. They just give you, a big licensing deal worth $600 million, right? But it's something, and you have to keep track of these in an Excel spreadsheet, the date, the value of the deal, who the licensee was, what it was for, the therapy area, the type, anything specific, link in, copy, paste, put a folder together. I don't care what it is. You have to start keeping track of the deals that are happening in your area. Another freebie is Genome Web News. And they used to be very focused on like sequencing technologies. Now that, I think they still have a focus on diagnostics, but they do other things, a variety of things. They report all sorts of, not just deals, but stuff that's happening in your world. They used to be medical device daily, then it became medical device monthly. And now I think it's MDD, but it's only available, if you subscribe to it. Don't, at your stage, don't start subscribing to things. Try to get as many of the freebies out there in the world as you possibly can. Wall Street Journal reports things occasionally. You just really have to keep track of what's going on in the world around you. And if you know that there are competitors out there, if you know companies who are working in adjacent areas, if you could, set up in your, in your news feed, some kind of like tracking so that anytime something happens with this company or anytime something, if you have a particular licensee or acquirer in mind and you want to know every time Medtronic does a deal or every time J&J does a deal or every time Pfizer does a deal, I mean, you're going to get a million things because, Lilly and Pfizer, Novartis do a deal every single week, but it helps you to keep track. Are you able to share my contacts for the investment brokers that you trust? I can connect to me on LinkedIn. Most of the people that I work with are, they don't have time to look at everything. It has to be a match for their interests too. And I want to say something about the investment banks that I like and that I work with. They almost always will take a monthly retainer. Monthly retainers are anywhere from $6,000 to $15,000 a month, depending on what you're trying to do and the type of company and the type of deal that you are at. Besides for that, they will want a percentage of the deal. The percentage could be as low as, 1%. It could be as high as 6%, because they're also trying to make a minimum. So these are some things that you have to realize. I don't think a broker dealer is an answer for everything in the early stage. I think that going out there and seeing what you can get and working with a very wise transactions attorney, somebody who has done a lot of deals in your particular sector. It's not enough that they do life sciences. If you're a diagnostics company and they've done therapeutics deal, ask them for their colleague who does the same on diagnostics. And if you're a digital health company and they do primarily therapeutics, you try to find somebody who's done digital health. A lot of word of mouth. I cannot overemphasize that you need to surround yourself with a village of people who know, who have been there, who have done that. There are so many mentoring programs now. NYU has a new one called Endless Frontier Labs. I signed up as a mentor just to see what it was all about. It's free to companies. I think they should be charging, money for it. There are all sorts of incubators and accelerators of varying value. You have to decide for yourself if it's worth giving up 6% or 8% or whatever equity to be in it. Most of the time I say no, but I can't say that for everybody. Some of the very well-knowns, Y Combinator can go out there and they've got a track record, that is unparalleled, but will they work for a company like yours? I don't know. You have to evaluate it yourself. What else? But can I share, for the right company? Yes, I can share, reach out to me separately and ask who the good ones are. And they're hard to find. They're just hard to find. And you have to decide if you have the money to pay for this and if you're at the right stage. Any other questions? Okay. Question, how to get to yes. There's a book called How to Get to Yes. You should go out there and buy it. But again, there are so many different kind of negotiating tactics. Here's some of the things that worked for me when I was running my software company. My CEO and I, we were running the company and we would always play good cop, bad cop. And when we were getting into some of these licensing discussions, we'd stand outside the room and look at each other and say, are you going to be good cop bad now? Or am I going to be good cop now? Like, which role are you going to play? So, that's sometimes something that works out. And you could say, if you're in a discussion with Lilly and they really want your asset. And by the way, the business development and licensing people at Lilly, they are compensated for getting deals done. If they're talking to you and you're going into due diligence with them, they are serious about it, getting a deal done. And if you can have an insider at Lilly and they'll say to you, look, you're never going to get more than $10 million upfront or something like that, then that you're armed with information and you can walk in and say, look, my CEO would never accept anything less than $10 million up front, right? So you know that they're going to start, you know that that's going to be part of the deal. My CEO would never let this go for this, or my CEO would never let that. Our board is absolutely adamant. So that's a little bit of the good cop, bad cop negotiation. There are generally 5 stages to every negotiation. Preparation, that's what we are completely focused on. The information exchange, ask the open-ended leading questions to try to understand the value of your asset from their point of view, and reiterate what you're hearing from them. Like, reiterate the need and what it means to them to be able to plug this asset into their pipeline and not let them go to competitors' asset to plug in if, and you want them to do a deal with you. The bargaining aspect, again, a transactional attorney, I think, will help you the most with that, though you should have those informal discussions. And then, concluding the transactions and executing the agreements. Those are the parts that are most important. So we are up against our time. I want everyone to please take a look at the link for the survey that was posted initially. And I wonder, Joy, if you have a link to the survey, or if you looked at, there it is. Oh, is that it? Yeah, SurveyMonkey. Please tell me how useful this session was for you and whether or not I answered your questions as we come up upon closing. I can stay an extra few minutes if you want, but we definitely need to know how important this was for you, because it helps us to tailor these to your interest and to the questions that you have. I'll answer one more question. There was a question here about how can you approach a negotiation that starts from almost impossible to align positions. It's the same old, same old. You have to ask questions and find some meeting their needs. If you can't meet their needs and this is not going to be a good deal for you, it's not going to happen. You're looking for people whose title, the word, people who get licensing deals done, and ideally business development in the therapy area, in the business unit that deals with your therapy area. When you're talking about a large company like Lilly or Biogen or Novartis, and you're a CNS drug, you need to go to whoever is leading business development for CNS. So those are the people you're looking for. Right, and I'm not a metabolic, I'm a CNS. I have to look for the guy, or the person, the girl who does CNS. So you're looking for VP, business development in the business unit that you're looking for. A warm introduction is best. I cannot tell you how many deals I've done where the deals were initiated by a board member, including giant acquisitions, billion-dollar acquisitions, where it's my board member sits on their board, brings the company to our attention, the 2 CEOs get talking, and now we're talking M&A. So board members, advisors, if you've got investors, they are all warm introductions to the people you want to talk with. There's an article I wrote on my LinkedIn profile, and it talks about like 6 degrees of separation, how you can get warm introductions to investors. I think the same thing is true with business development. So if you know that Lilly recently did a deal with, for a drug that came from your university, let's say University of Washington, St. Louis, you can approach the PI of that lab, where, the inventor of the drug, to say, congratulations, Lilly just did a great deal. Do you think you can make an introduction to me to the people at Lilly who did the deal? Whoever it was who did the deal. Right? Or if you know someone, a colleague at a university, which recently did a deal, or, anything, just try to find a 6 degrees of separation, get yourself to that Kevin Bacon who's going to open the doors for you. When there's nothing like a CEO who recently did a deal to approach whoever it is they did a deal with to say, you guys should take a look at that company. There's nothing like that. Does it always happen? No, that's why we have bio, right? To do partnering and business development deals and licensing deals, discussions with big pharma there, as well as every investment conference, some of which are free, but most of which are not, and it's hard for a small company to afford it. But if there's anything in your local ecosystem that puts you in front of investors, that puts you in front of pharma, medical devices, brings in medical device people, show and tell day, whatever it is, just take advantage of what's available in your local ecosystem. You need to start building a network around you, whether you're in, Idaho or whether you're in South San Francisco.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think we're coming up at to now 20 minutes over. If anybody has one final burning question, there's a hand up from Lynn Feldman.
Sorry, I put a hand up before when you asked a question, and I think we've moved on. So thank you.
Okay.
I do have a personal question for you, but once you accept LinkedIn, I can send you a message.
Okay, perfect. So I hope this was helpful for you. It's really hard because I feel like I'm talking in generalities, and I'm trying to cover all the platforms in our life science world, whether it's digital health diagnostics, devices, consumer health, every manner of therapeutics. But I hope I've given you some courage to build that ecosystem around you, to start keeping track of comps, to see what your competitors are up to learn who might be interested in doing deals with you, and not to be afraid to open doors.
Dr. Rubin, this is Monique. I just wanted to say I am getting great feedback. So if it feels like you're talking to yourself, you're not. Everyone is really giving good thumbs up. I did want to note that some people would love to learn more, continue the conversation. And I wanted to just flag that there are one-on-one meeting opportunities for awardees, or if you're a potential applicant. And we can resend those emails, but you can reach out to us via email. You do not need to have LinkedIn. I got a comment that some people don't have LinkedIn. So we will resend a thank you note, but also include our email addresses again so that you can reach us.
That's the best way, because I do feel like I'm talking in generalities. I've done hundreds of transactions and each one has been different. My last tip I would say to you is that large companies have templates for how they operate. So if you want to do a deal with Lilly or Pfizer, and that somebody else who's done a deal with them, you can reach out to that CEO or that VP of business development and say, I just want to, I'm about to get into licensing discussions with Pfizer. And, I'd love to be able to learn, or even better, get someone from your board to do it to somebody on their board, because you want to arm yourself with insider info. I did a deal with Biogen years ago where somebody on our board knew the chief medical officer there, and they just had coffee. And it was really a bit of like probing and like, what kind and how does it work? And it's like, oh, all our deals are like this, or we'll never do more than that. And then we knew what to ask for, and we knew what the terms were going to look like. It wasn't a big surprise. By the way, again, a transactions attorney, not going to have big surprises if they're used to doing this in your therapy area and with the typical players. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about how useful this was if you go out there and be successful. And as Monique said, you could sign up for one-on-ones. Please fill out the Survey Monkey. And if there's nothing else that's really burning, I'm going to just wish you good luck. What you're doing is the most important job and also the hardest job in the world, except for parenting. But maybe some of you would disagree if you're lucky enough. Thank you so much.
And thank you to all of you for the direct messaging. I've seen some of your comments. Thanks for your feedback. And thank you for the folks who fill out the feedback form. We have just about 50. Help us get to 60, 70. We really appreciate it. And Dr. Rubin, thank you for your time. We love your energy and your commitment and all the tips.
Good luck, everybody. Have a
Take
good
care.
rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye.